My name is Kim Hindart, and I'm Chief Security Officer at Citynetwork Hosting. That means I'm a techie guy that are not allowed to work with technology anymore. So, pretty much, shortly about Citynetwork. We started as a web hosting firm back in 2002. Shortly thereafter, we realized that people wanted to buy capacity, not only from the hosting, so we became an infrastructure provider. And that has grown a lot. Now we are located in a lot of data centers all over the world. And we are actually starting to focus more and more on enterprise solutions as well. That's what I'm here to talk to you a bit today. Exactly 1 year ago, we were at another conference where some lawyers stood up on stage and said that it is impossible for a regulated industry like healthcare to buy a public cloud service. So that's something that triggered us, because I thought, well, why should it not be possible? Why has no one actually started to provide this? So 1 year ago, we started this project, and it's done and ready today to launch. And it is exactly that. It is a public cloud offering, which has the same business model as Amazon or Azure. You pay as you go. So you can launch servers, have them up and running for 5 minutes, and then shut them down, and you only pay for 5 minutes of use. But the thing is, it's compliant. It follows all laws and regulations concerning bank and finance, healthcare, and government. So that's something we wanted to match these two, so the best of two worlds. Well, how did we do it? Well, to start with, what does compliance mean here today? Well, we started in Sweden. This is all, of course, Swedish data centers for high security. So it's the Swedish authorities. We follow all rules and regulations concerning Finansinspektionen. We follow all rules and regulations concerning Socialstyrelsen. That's patient data and bank and finance information. We follow all rules and regulations concerning Datainspektionen. All rules and regulations concerning MSB and PTS. This is important to note as well, that it's not the rules they put on us as a service provider. We have our set of rules from Datainspektionen as a service provider. What we need to follow and be compliant with is the customer's rules and regulations. So a bank and an insurance company has very different rules than us as a service provider. But it's the customer's rules and regulations that we provide infrastructure that's compliant. So that's it. What are the things you need to think about when you start a compliant cloud? And this is some reason, because people ask me, why doesn't Amazon and Microsoft provide this? There are a few obstacles you need to overcome. One important one is that you need to remember, Yale always trumps fines. What do I mean with that? The important thing is we usually look at and think of where is the data stored. Yeah, a search warrant, if we have storage in US, will give the legal authorities in the US possibility to get the data and bring it home. But that's not good enough. Usually people tend to forget. And this is an important case that's been up in the media a bit. It's the legal jurisdiction of the owners. Microsoft is a good case. They were forced by a court in the US to provide all the data they have stored in Ireland, in the Irish data center. So a court in the US said to Microsoft, we want you to copy all the data from Ireland and bring it to us. And they know that they can do it because they are the owners, so they are under legal authority. This was something that Microsoft, of course, disputed and tried to get away with, but the problem is, like I said, Yale always trumps fines. So even if they get a lot of fines for doing this from EU, it's still better than the upper management going to Yale in the US. So when you have conflicting legal authorities of the owners, that is a possible way for your data to get leaked to other authorities than you answer to. And the same is a good case with a bank and administrators. They outsourced administration to South Africa. The problem is that the South African government came and said to the administrators, give us the access codes to the bank, or we put you in Yale. This was something that we found pretty suitable when it comes to Sweden. We are a completely owned Swedish company. We only have Swedish administrators, and we only store data in Sweden. So we can fulfill all of this to ensure that for Swedish companies and Swedish governments, we have the same legal jurisdiction all over as they would have as a company themselves. So there's no difference between us and them in that sense. This is a problem for like Microsoft and the big international companies. It's a bit niche that we can focus on. Then we have accountability. That's another big problem for using cloud, something that's a big concern from the authorities. And that's why there is an argument that you couldn't, as a healthcare provider, for instance, use public cloud services. And the reasoning is, if a nurse goes into your patient records just for curiosity, she wants to look to your patient file, but she's not your nurse. She has no reason, medical reason to do that. That's illegal, and she can go to Yale. If an IT administrator in an outsource company do this, the company will face fines. But me as an employee, I won't face anything other than an angry boss who will scream at me because I look at stuff that I'm not supposed to. But I don't have the same legal risk for me as a person, as a nurse, or as a medical professional has. This was something that we needed to change in order to be able to provide cloud services that are compliant. So all our employees are forced to sign the same legal agreements as a medical professional for handling patient data. So they fall under the same rule. And this is important for the companies to be able to do this. We provide that our employees will act and be regulated by the same code of conduct as they would do themselves, because there can't be any difference from the hospital to have the infrastructure hosted by themselves and run by itself or managed by us. Also something that was something that we need to look at that's not in the regular sense of a public cloud. This is a few of the things that I think makes it hard for big providers like Amazon to adapt to the situation, but these are the demands from the authorities. If you look at the infrastructure itself, what we need to build, then you have the basics for information security, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. These are the proper basics. And these, well, big companies like Amazon do this with excellence, great services provided. The thing that the legal authorities demand is non-repudiation, authenticity, auditability. They have separated demands for this. What does this mean in practice? Yeah, it means that we need to keep track on anything, especially in financial services. If you get the financial advice from a bank or insurance company or a broker, it needs to be documented exactly who's what and how did. This is demands Finansinspektionen. So it puts special demands for us to be able to handle this. These, of course, can all be gathered in a big compliance logging hoarding. We log everything. That's the reason. The log rules for a forensic log trail that's demanded for this is unaltered, unfiltered, uninterrupted. The problem to take with this back is that the logging is, of course, extremely confidential because all credentials, all passwords are stored in the log. So you have to have a bit of a thought when you put up the infrastructure. How do you handle logging? Logging has to be remote, logging has to be stored, and the legal requirements are, for instance, that if you alter a pension fund today, you can dispute that you got bad advice for that pension when you want to cash it out. And that can be 30 years later down the line. We need to have that data stored for auditability 30 years down the line. This is actually why we put up separate infrastructures just to handle this high security, high compliance, highly regulated industries. A question I'm asked a lot is that is a true multi-tenant infrastructure secure enough? One demand and the only way we can actually provide a pay-as-you-go model that they want to have is that if we use multi-tenant infrastructure. That's not possible otherwise. So then the question is that secure enough? Because if you talk to governments, if you talk to the highly regulated industries, there is a ruling opinion that the only way they can run their infrastructure is on separate hardware, on private dedicated hardware. You cannot share it. So private clouds are the only way to go. This is also something I wanted to a bit dispute and challenge and say, why not? It's absolutely possible, because in nowhere in the rules and regulations does it say that it has to be separate hardware. So this one is a discussion of what's happening today. I can, of course, agree that separate hardware is more secure. You have less of attack vectors and threats than you have in a multi-tenant solution if you have a private cloud and a private solution. That's true. But if you look at the trends, if you compare logical isolation and physical isolation, is that the difference in risk between logical and physical. If we don't just put numbers to it, but if you just check the difference in risk between having a multi-tenant and having a physical location, your own hardware, the risk is steadily decreasing. How many here use KVM? Yeah, a few. Virtualization is taking major steps for providing a good isolation, good security. Are you familiar with VMware, Hyper-V? How many here virtualize? Yeah. This is a necessity. They have to increase their security. So the difference between logical and physical in the security risk between them is steadily decreasing. The price difference, the cost difference between having your own physical hardware and a logical separation, it's steadily increasing. These two will meet at some point. You will get less and less of a difference in the risk between them and more difference in cost. And then you come back to the big security issue. Of course, if you have unlimited security budget, yeah, of course, have separated hardware, build super secure, safe locations where only you have access. It's expensive. And then it's the reasoning, where do you put the money to best use? Is it best used, does the increased or decreased risk of having your physical isolation motivate the extra cost you have? And all research today point to no, it does not. Because you can put that money to better use in security awareness. I usually like to compare this to traffic scenarios. The most important tool for minimizing risks and damages within the traffic is traffic education. It's driver's licenses. It's not airbags or major roads. It's driver's licenses that decrease the risk of personal damage in the traffic. It's the same pretty much with internet and infrastructure. Physical separation costs a lot. And that money is better spent on educating in security awareness, because it's the people that will be the vulnerable point moving forward. It's not the technology. If we look at this, then the thing is that we are afraid of rogue VMs in a shared environment, because this one is one customer and this one is another customer, and this customer should not in any way be able to affect the other customers. You have different attack vectors. You can attack the intercommunication, you can attack different VMs, or you can go through the hypervisor itself. And what we've done and looked at and studied a bit is the different types of hypervisors you can use. We compared Xen, VMware, Hyper-V, and KVM. And the most important thing is, of course, how good is the hypervisor for security threats? And how good is the logging and auditability for hypervisors? Because this is a very important point as well in high security. We are not required by law to protect any type of vulnerability. That's not required by law. The law itself has actually understood that you can never build a 100% foolproof system. There will always be vulnerabilities and attacks. What we are required by law is to audit and detect any type of intrusion attempts. So that's the most important part, and that's something, of course, we want to minimize the actual intrusions. That's good, just got good customer care. But the thing is, with high security, is the most important part is having a hypervisor that provides both good isolation in a both documented case and good auditability. This is something we do today with Linux KVM, and we use OpenStack as the management tool. So the reasoning and the question I usually get, open source versus proprietary systems. Yeah, well, that's a discussion you can have in many points, but the thing is with open source is that it's more studied in a public forum. It's been more publicly scrutinized. You can say that it's a risk that you provide the source code open because people have easily time to find vulnerabilities. But it's also a good opportunity, because if good guys find the vulnerabilities before the bad guys, then you will be alerted to them. If you have proprietary systems like Microsoft or Apple, the thing is, if there is a vulnerability, do we necessarily know? That's something. So our reasoning was pretty much do the things that you have most public research handling. Well, shortly, concisely, we're running a bit late. Any questions? This is pretty much what we...
Questions to Kim? Yes.
I'm at Netnod. I was a bit interested in the audit handling of the audit logs.
Yeah.
I guess you separate them from ordinary system syslogs or stuff like that, because on a daily basis you have to maybe look into how the systems act, but if you have to do an audit, if someone did something wrong, it should be a bit more complicated to look into the audit logs, I guess.
Yeah, actually the thing is that providers like Red Hat today provide audit templates that are excellent, that you fulfill a certain amount of certification or specified for a certain industry. And you have to do that and send the audit logs to a remote logging. And then you have regular syslogs on the machine itself. So engineers and technicians for maintenance and operations, they look at the syslogs. And then you have a remote log server that only gathers the audit logs that are required for auditability and legal compliance.
And then how do you audit the audit log servers and no one tamper with the audit logs?
We have audit log servers are put in write-only mode. So they, the disks are only allowed to gather things. And then they are locked away, and we are not allowed to look at them. Only the authorities are allowed to look at them, because they're a neutral party. We can't give them directly back to the customers. We can only give them to the financial authorities directly, because we have a multi-tenant. So there's a lot of customers. But we provide them to Finansinspektionen for auditability from them. Any more questions?
Okay, if there are no more questions, thank you very much for that, Kim.